right? And so this is very deeply wired into what your ego is. Your ego is not just the sense of you, but it's also all of those habits. And it's all this giant, interconnected, vast network of stuff. And it's very complicated. And what happens is, like any complex system, if you studied systems theory, see my episode, Intro to Systems Thinking, for that. As you should know by now, any complex system has inertia to it. It also has a homeostatic drive to it, which means it tries to maintain its current state. Because for a system to be whatever it is, however it is, doesn't matter how it is, for it to maintain that structure over a period of time, whether it's days or months or years or a human lifetime, it has to maintain a self-similarity. Because if that system changes too much, or it allows forces from the outside, chaotic forces, to come in there and to rearrange the system, whether it's for the worse or for the better, it doesn't matter. To the system, it's always perceived as a mortal threat, because it literally is. Because, like, let's say you have a castle built out of Legos, right? The Lego blocks. And there's a certain form that this castle takes. Well, you could say that's like a complex system in this metaphor. Well, if we rearrange the Lego blocks into some other form which is significantly different from the castle, see, if the castle was self-aware and it had if it was a living being and it could actually be complex enough in order to have a metabolism and to be able to look at itself and perceive itself, then what it would say is that, wait a minute, too many of my blocks are being changed and rearranged into this new structure, and now this new structure is not what I was. And therefore, that literally is the death of the castle in this case. See? And that's exactly what is happening inside your mind with you in your life when you're trying to create some kind of significant change or transformation in your life. And that is what we're talking about with self-actualization and with all spiritual work, is we're looking to get a significant change in our life, which is something that's actually quite rare. Very few people undertake a conscious, deliberate effort to significantly change their life in a very fundamental way. Most people, when they try to make a change in their life, they're just doing window dressing. They're changing the very surface of their life. They're not going very deep, trying to change like fundamental, existential aspects of their being. They change little things, like they change maybe how they dress, or they change one of their friends out of a dozen friends, or maybe they change a relationship. And even that can be difficult. Even that can produce ego backlash. So what is ego backlash? Ego backlash, if we're thinking of the mind as this harmonic oscillator, it's the oscillation of the string, or of the spring, rather. It's the oscillation of the spring. So what that means is that you should expect that any time you make a significant change to this complex, dynamic, nonlinear living system that you are, you should expect a counterforce that will pull you back towards homeostasis, towards the status quo of whatever you were. So if you were fat your whole life and now you're trying to get skinny, you should expect a counterforce to come in and pull you back towards being fat. Because being fat is a sort of a survival coping mechanism, believe it or not, that your mind created. And it's getting you some kind of payoff. So maybe it's because you were bullied at school so much that you've developed such low self-esteem that that's why you feel like you need to eat. And you're always overeating and you're eating all these desserts and all this sort of stuff because you're not getting maybe the kind of love that you wanted to get. That's just like one example, of course. That's not the reason that all people are fat. But that's just one simplistic example. And so the ego backlash is just whenever you're trying to make progress in your life and make a significant change, the more significant of a change you're making, the more fundamental the change is, not just window dressing stuff, but if it goes like to the existential level, then you should expect a very significant force to kind of pull you back out of it. That's ego backlash. And it doesn't feel good. And it can feel very disappointing. It can feel depressing because you feel like you've taken a giant step forward in your life, trying to change something. Maybe you're trying to change your career, you're trying to change your diet, you're trying to change and become a better meditator, or you're trying to become a nicer person, you're trying to work on some emotional problem you have, maybe you have some anger problem, and so you're trying to work on that so that you don't hurt the people you love in your life. But then you make progress, and then as soon as you feel like, okay, now I finally made it, I've made the change, and now it really seems like it's stuck. And then, of course, you backslide and you take 2 steps back. And then you start to wonder, like, will I ever change? Is self-help even a thing? Can it even work, or is it just all pipe dreams? Is spirituality really a thing, or is it just wishful thinking? Can I really make significant changes in my life? And the answer, of course, is that you certainly can, but it's going to take a lot more work and suffering than you probably realized. See, most people don't appreciate what change means. Change literally means the death of you. Now, there can be various degrees of this death, from a total degree to minor degrees, which is mostly what people encounter, like, for example, when you're trying to change your diet, some part of you really is going to die if your diet is really going to change. And so that part of you will be struggling to make sure that you don't change your diet, because that part of you doesn't want to die. It's scared. And of course, it's not just going to come out and outright tell you what's going on. All of these are very kind of like subsurface, subconscious forces. And a lot of times all you experience is you just experience like the blunt emotional impact of the ego backlash. The ego backlash usually doesn't announce itself to you like, oh, here I am after your meditation retreat. You've done all this meditation work, and now here I come, the ego backlash. It doesn't work that way. Usually it just feels like some sort of very primal force, emotional force, is driving you back to your old, unhealthy, dysfunctional ways. Like you might get a craving for some cheesecake, or you might get a craving for some porn or for some sex, or you might get this real like sadness in you that makes you want to go back to your ex and make up with them, even though you know that they're abusive to you. Or after weeks or months of meditating hardcore and doing all this self-inquiry and making lots of spiritual progress, then all of a sudden you crash back down into your ego, and you start to judge people, and you start to criticize people, and you start to demonize people, which was something that you would think you'd be over by now. And now like it comes back. Maybe now some anger comes back at you, kind of like that. And it just sort of like, it sweeps you. It sweeps you like a giant ocean wave, just kind of like carries you out into the ocean, away from shore that you've been swimming to. It's kind of like that. And that can be very frustrating, and it can take you by surprise. Because a lot of times in this work, we like to trick ourselves. The ego likes to trick itself into thinking that it's more developed and advanced than it really is, that it's further along than it really is.